Good morning, it's Vaughan at westcoatbellpottery.ca in Nova Scotia, Canada. I'm going to do a little set of videos on some glaze testing, teapot making, decorating, so a combination of a bunch of things. And the aim is to try and figure out some new type of glazes, mostly using tenmukus, where you actually mix glazes together rather than mixing recipes. I've got glazes. I'm going to try mixing ratios of glazes together to see what can be done with these glazes, diluting them and mixing with others. So it'll start off with teapot making, because I know that's fun to learn how to make teapots, different shapes and stuff, different forms. And then we'll end up with some decorating where I'll be using teapots plus some tea bowls and platters, and then finally it'll be all about the glazing. It should be a fun triple videos. So let's get going with some teapots. This is the teapot that I threw first, and I'm going to show you how I do it in a minute. I always throw one teapot to kind of get a feel for the bag of clay, make sure it's in good shape, and then also to see what kind of opening I can get on the top without struggling to make it too thin, tiny or thin, whatever, or too wide. So I can do that, and then I measure it, and I'm going to throw every teapot to that size, because if you actually throw 8 teapots with 8 different types of lids, sizes of lids, you're probably going to end up mixing them up. So that's the size of the hole. I'm going to now try and throw all of these teapots to that size. The belly isn't important at this point, because I may actually open these up a little bit wider when they're a bit firmer, you can do a double belly on some of them. But I just wanted to get one done so I can actually get a feel for it and all that. So there's that. Okay, so this gets rid of the whistly wheel, and I think that will help. The centering is the most important part whenever you throw any form whatsoever. And this coning thing that you're seeing me do is basically a very traditional way of stretching the clay and then recompressing it. And if you find when in your hands you can feel a lump, or you'd feel like an air bubble, then you know you've got to work on the clay a little bit longer. But the idea is to stretch the clay and recompress it and move it around a little bit, and you get a feel for the clay. And at some point you even the pressure between the top hand and the side hand, and you can actually center it completely. Once that's achieved, you do what I just did, which is push your finger down and go about a centimeter from the bottom, and then pull to the side. And I usually pull my finger towards my body at that point, and then I'll take my finger to the 2 o'clock mark and actually pull the finger towards the center, and that recompresses the clay towards the center and prevents S-cracks. And this pull is really just to chase the water all the way up the pot, because basically, it actually dries out when your finger causes friction on the clay, and so you move to the level up a bit higher each time. But the idea is you wet it completely, then you put the pressure on, and it dries instantly. One revolution, you've dried that level, so you have to be up a bit higher for each revolution. And the fingertips are pressing right opposite each other, basically. And now you're going very gentle, because you don't want to actually flare it out. So there's more pressure with the outside fingers, just to kind of narrow. And you saw me put my finger over there, so it will actually pull the clay in a little further. Wetting it inside and outside for this last pull, and push your finger deep on the outside, and then the inside fingers are letting the outside fingers win a little bit, and that forces a little lump of clay above your finger, and that's the bit that makes the pot get a little higher. So you actually follow that lump all the way up. Remember, one revolution, you should be a little bit higher up the next revolution, so you stay on the wet spot. If it dries out, you'd have to actually let go very slowly and re-wet the piece, but try not to let it dry out, because it just means you're going too slow and you're staying on the same level for 2 revolutions. We've got a nice belly there, so I'm going to drag the water out at this point, because I'll probably have to work now just on the top area. But I've got to get the water off the wall. It keeps softening down as long as you keep water on that wall. And it also makes it so it's very even. The moisture is very even all the way up the center there, because the sponge basically followed the shape all the way up. So now when I pull my fingers on the inside, there's no slippery spot and no dry spot. It's all the same moisture content all the way up. And the metal rib that I'm holding on the outside is there just to drag the water off and to also make the curve a little bit more refined and smooth. And now my rib's got too much clay on it, so you have to dry it out. That little fine metal edge doesn't cause too much friction on the clay, so you can actually, sort of compress a little bit without it risking the clay buckling. And now get that water off in that upper area there, and I'm pushing that little hole in a little bit each time so that it actually gets a little tinier. The shoulders are needing some work there to kind of make that curve a little nicer. And if you dig the edge of the rib in, you can create that little line there, which gives it a bit of definition at the top of the shoulder. It keeps the clay compressed too, using a metal rib like that, so you don't risk it splitting in the wall, even though the wall's getting quite thin at this point. That wooden rib is pushing in to redefine that little edge there. And now measuring it, whatever this diameter is going to be, I'm going to try and make every lid and every pot to that diameter. The first teapot set the profile basically and actually established that hole size, and now I'm going to try and do every one the same. Different forms, but just keep the hole the same so it makes it consistent. And that's just so they can slip the wire through a little easier. On occasion you can put these back on the wheel about an hour later and just get the belly pushed out a little more. But if you want to do fluting or anything like that, it's not a good idea to make it too thin. That's a nice rounded form. Okay, just to go over this quickly once again, compressing the clay. Really press hard. Your left hand has got the little finger right up the wheel head. You can see that little gouge in the very bottom of the lump of clay. That's my little finger on my left hand, making sure that that clay stays compressed right at the bottom. I'm not stretching this time because it's pretty much in center already. And this is where the middle finger feels for the center, goes down 1 centimeter from the bottom, it pulls towards my body, and then I'll take my finger to the 2 o'clock mark and actually sort of compress the clay. There you go. There you go. Pull it towards the center, and that compresses the clay again. It reduces the risk of S-cracks if you do that. Okay, water's inside and outside evenly, so I can do my first pull. And remember, 1 revolution, you've got to be higher up. That way you always chase the wet spot and your fingers never dry the clay out. And compress the rim, finger right on the top of the rim to push it down. It's wet inside and outside evenly all the way, so I'm just chasing the wet spot again all the way up. My fingertips are right opposite each other on the inside as well. And now I've got to narrow that top. The clay wants to get wider, so you've got to keep enough pressure on to stop it getting wide. Now we'll do a little shaping. So my inside fingers have got more pressure on at this point. to make it a little wider. But the outside fingers are right opposite still. Somewhere we're going to need a shoulder now, so we're going to have to really define that edge. This is collaring, so if you get it a little too wide, you can just make it taper in a little bit just by circling the clay with your fingers and putting a little pressure on. We've got all the height that we need. So that was evening the moisture out all the way up the wall. So taper it in, surrounding it evenly so you get as much pressure on the outside there. And now you're just going to define the edge with the metal rib, drag the water off. There's hardly any friction when you use that thin little metal edge, so I like to throw with that quite a lot. And now, judging this by eye, I'm going to leave that hole a certain size and hope it's the size of the calipers. And this is compressing that top edge a little bit. Well, pretty good. After this many years, you can pretty much guess it by eye. That's to make the wire go through a little easier right at the bottom. And that's to define the foot, so I won't have to trim a foot on, it's already got one on. Okay, this one is going to be a little bit different. So we've done one of the belly teapots, and then we did one of the sort of more stable, flared out at the bottom kind of teapot, so it's hard to knock over. And this one, we're going to make it more of an art piece. So it's functional, but it's not one somebody buys, just to make a cup of tea or a pot of tea. So I'm making it very tall, but it's fairly narrow. The pulling is identical to the last two pieces. You just have to keep more pressure on when you're actually trying to taper it in like this with the outside fingers, so the inside fingers give way a little bit. But obviously when you get tall and narrow like this, it's hard to get your hand inside, so we've wet it evenly from the top all the way to the bottom. So now we're going to do a really sort of a double belly pull. And it's a judgment call when you actually do this kind of pull, because where are you going to sort of finish the bottom belly and where are you going to start the top belly. And I like to feel like I'm going up to about the halfway point, and then now going to come out again. And this is where you may lose some if you try this the first time, because it can actually collapse in on itself. So the top belly is a little wider than the bottom belly, and that shoulder you want to make sure it's not going to be with really soft clay, because then it can actually collapse. This clay is pretty good. I mean, it's not super soft and it's not totally hard. It might be advice to go with some slightly stiffer clay when you first try one of these. This is important. I'm dragging the sponge all up the inside wall, so we know we've got no slippery spots and no dry spots. I'm trying to get the water off the belly, because that's the bit that will continually soften, and you may end up having it collapse if you don't get all the water off. The sponge took it off the inside, but the metal rib is grabbing it off the outside. You can play around with these forms because I've made them so that the bottom belly is actually 3/4 of the piece, and you just have a little belly at the very top. But it's completely, no rules if you can make it up. Just find yourself a form that looks nice and doesn't look like it's going to collapse. But we are still going to have to make that opening at the top the same as the other teapots. It's just a matter of really kind of determining when you're happy with those two curves and their relationship to each other. As I said, this teapot is more of an art piece because it would be a little top heavy, I would say. So the more pressure you put on with the outside finger, the narrower it will get. There's a tiny bit of a wobble on the top of that rim there that I will have to deal with because the lid wouldn't sit flat. You can sometimes do that just by compressing with your finger on the rim if it's not too bad. And then there's also the way that everybody hates and fears is where you trim it off with a pin. And now you're just really going to have to go for it when you do. When you use the pin, you just make sure your hand doesn't wobble, and you pull it up where it's thick, and then you get a clean pull. But that rim would mean the pot would have, the lid would have not sat flush with the piece. So it was important to get that. And this is form now. I would tell you, if you like this, just make a whole bunch of them and see what you're happy with. My favorite is when you get one that's lower down but much wider. When you get that about 2/3 belly in the bottom and then about 1/3 of it on the top is a belly. So this one's very even, 50-50. Okay, I have about 1/3 of a pound here. And I'm going to make 8 different lids. All be very similar, obviously, but what I do is I just push my finger down and I leave a little thicker there, about 1.5 centimeters from the bottom. I'll pull my finger over, and then I still recompress from the 2 o'clock mark down towards the center, and it's very quick. I simply push my finger in to create that little rim that sits inside the teapot underneath the lid, and then I push in again to define that, and I'm doing it all by eye at this point. I'm not using the calipers, but it's not that hard to make one of these. And then the wooden tool is to actually lift it up and make it kind of form a curve underneath. So I push that little wooden pointed edge thing in underneath the lid, and here I just basically sharpen it up a little bit on the actual lid. The flange that's on the outside, which sits on the rim of the teapot, should be wide enough so that it will actually cover that rim of the teapot. And make sure the rim is actually level. If you're firing the pot on its rim in the kiln, that rim has to be totally level, otherwise your rim, your lid will actually warp. The flange will actually buckle a little bit. I actually fire on stilts, so I don't have to worry about that. And that's a good guess. It fits pretty much perfectly. Just pushing it in just a touch. It's better to make sure it's a bit loose than if it's too tight. I'm not going to use any water to lift these off because I have that sort of flange overhanging there, and get my fingers underneath and just lift it. You don't need to use water when it's like. Okay, this little ball of clay is probably maybe 1/8 of a pound. It's just tiny, and this is going to be your spout. And it's hard to center little tiny pieces of clay like this, but surround it completely with both hands and just force the pressure on. And when you feel like you've got a nice sort of piece of clay that's not got any wobble to it, push your finger right through to the bat, and then just open it up a little bit just by pulling to the side. You know, I'm pulling towards 5 o'clock toward towards my body, and then here you're really pushing in, you know, hard with the outside finger, and your top finger is actually stopping it from wobbling on the rim going up and down. Now dribble water in and out, and do the same pull again. Push in, and then get that bit of clay above your fingers and just push all the way up to the top. And teapot spouts tend to twist a little bit in the firing too, so the longer you throw a spout, the more the memory of the clay starts to kick in, and it will remember this twisting. So I like to throw the spouts fairly quickly, and I don't have too much twisting when I actually fire them. But I've seen teapot spouts twist a lot. There we go. And that edge there should be fairly thin. Spouts can be long and thin, they can be short and squat, so you really just play around. There's no rule here, just whatever type of shape you want. That's so I can get the pin underneath a little bit easier. And there's water on the inside of this, but I'm going to cut it off in a sec so we don't have to get it off. It's a good idea to get the water off the actual spout on the outside. You can use a sponge or a metal rib, or you can use your finger. Sometimes it will actually just drag off with your finger. And then use the pin, just push it all the way through, and it'll lift up on the pin basically. Okay, we need to make some tiny little knobs for the lids, and what I do is I've got here about half a pound of clay, maybe 1/3 of a pound, and I'm simply going to cone it to it a little bit, and then I will use my fingers to make 8 little tiny knobs. You can actually do any kind of knob you want. You can make a little sculpture, which I often do the shape of a bird. You could even do a little strap on top of the teapot lid, and you could go for no knob at all, just have a little slightly curved dome, and that would be your lid. With, if it's small like this, your fingers can easily lift it, stretch far enough apart to lift the rims of the lid up to actually remove the lid. But I'm actually making 8 little knobs. Okay, I'm starting to work on these teapots now. They've been drying out all night. It's actually quite late in the day already, 1:38. So I meant to get these this morning, but they're still soft enough. So I'm going to play around with distorting them a little bit. And when they're this, this is actually not bendable up there, but this is still soft, obviously. And I could actually belly that part out a little bit by pushing the brush on the inside, but I've actually found that when you do that, you have to be really careful, because it will actually, you've got to be very even about it. But you can just kind of do that. And I don't know if that's going to benefit too much this piece, but you can see that it will push out a little bit. So you can give it yourself a little bit more belly on the piece. I have found it very useful, these cheese cutters, for actually cutting down, but it sort of squashes the piece, so you've got to be a little careful. that, cuts it even both sides. And then I rest my finger behind that area there. And then, without getting too much water dribbling down there, you can kind of flatten that area that's going to be on the joint on the teapot, and you can also curve and basically open up for joining that area just there. Any lump of clay that thickens in that area will actually show up on the piece, so I try to keep it fairly even and thick and thin. I don't like it to be too thick. So I'm ending up with a shape that's like that. I also have these handle tools that I got from Bill Wright, remember? So I'm going to try cutting a couple of these and see how they go. So basically place it at the end of the block, and I remember from last time I had to just not bury that top of the tool, so you barely have to go through. I was hoping it would pull the handle, but it didn't. Can I pull it out? Yes, I pulled it out. So you get a nice, large strap handle. So whenever you stick one of these on, you've got to make sure you put the little hole in. So I usually just wet that, because I want that to be really pliable when I actually put it on here. And I just position it to see where the best position is. I don't want to get too high to there, because I don't want to risk the water as you're pouring coming out of here before it comes out of there. So wherever I put it, it's below already. It's a good idea to pull it down just a touch. And then you make a mark. And then you're going to cut some holes in this. I can use a drill bit, but this little tool that I think I got, I can't remember where I got it from actually, but it makes a sort of perfect hole size. And I just bang it to bang the hole. And you can buy specific hole making tools to do this, but this little, it's like a small trimming tool I think, but works just as good. And I put my finger right behind where I pushed through so it didn't push out a great big lump. And then, here's a trick. Just get this little tool, the back end of it, and just kind of push it through. It makes a slightly wider hole, and sort of rounds it off as well. Make sure it's wet. And then I'm just kind of wiggling it as I pull it out. And then your little spout thing, you're just gonna, you know where it's going to stick because you've got the marks from it. This is still very soft clay here, so I can just push it on. I don't need to score or scratch. If the clay it comes off in your fingers when you do that, it's soft enough so two clays will join together. You don't have to score and scratch. And make sure this is in a good position. The bottom of that is down to just above that ring there, so that means I'm able to fill the teapot to there. Rotate it a bit. I'm just trying to make sure that these sides are fairly even. And if you're lucky enough, you can get your hand in there, but I can't, so I'm going to use the paintbrush. You want pressure from behind it if you're going to do that. So I'm pushing wherever my thumb's pushing, I'm pushing with a paintbrush on the inside. And then the spout, to make sure it doesn't drip, should be curled over so it hangs down a little bit low without thinning too much, otherwise it will chip easily. And when the customer wants you to provide them with a teapot that is totally guaranteed that it won't drip, and it's a big deal to some people, because I actually have people testing teapots in the gallery. That might be a little thin. I'm going to try going with the thicker one. I think the big one is a bit too big. So I'm going to do the same as if I was doing one of my pulled handles. I'm going to squish it and make it thicker at the join area. And then dab that. And then wherever I'm going to put this, it really works some slip nicks. Aggressively rub in so you're building some slip up in that location. And then down here it's very soft anyway, so I don't really have to do much down there. And if you do have to score anytime, make yourself one of these. It's just a lump of Fimo clay and then some darning needles sticking out, and then you can just kind of do that. You don't need to, it glaze this soft, but that speeds up your scratching a little bit. Alright, you don't need to do this. This is fresh clay, so. And you want to make sure that it's straight. So put it on and look at it, and then pull it a little bit to the side if it looks like it needs to be straightened. I tend to pull the handle out like that to kind of get that look, just to kind of make sure it's in the right place. And then you've got to kind of eyeball this and say how big a handle do we want. And just for luck, I take a little bit of extra clay like that, and I stick it in that join area where the clay is being joined, and then you can actually, once you get it sealed in there, so get your paintbrush again, you can use a throwing stick to reach down there if the paintbrush doesn't reach, but you just want to put some pressure down at the bottom with the paintbrush, and press in, and press back with your hands on the inside too. To make sure you get a good join. No water, but wet but not dripping with water. I press that down. So my little handle has got extra bit of clay to thicken it up down there. Of course, it's my teapot. I always put that little thumb, a home for the thumb. This identifies my pieces for decades. Place it on there. Put a little spiral in there. A little spiral. and the lids are still too soft. I'm just going to go on like that. So we'll see what we get with all the teapots. Okay, let's get the wheel on. Lids are now firm enough to trim without the trimming sticking too much, but they're still soft enough so I can apply a knob to the top, which you just saw me throwing. So I'm just trimming off the excess, knowing it's fairly thick in the center there, and make sure I left that. And I was like a little decorative element on my tops, and I leave a little bit so I can do some floating too. So I'm going to go down there, create that little gully. Give myself a little stretch. That wasn't supposed to happen. This trimming tool is great, but I like my other little square end for doing those things. But I'm just going to do a little carving on that little element there. I thought I could feel something going on. Oh yeah, there it is. A little bit extra scoring there wouldn't go amiss because it's a bit drier this year. And then we put one of those knobs I just threw. They're all different. I'll just check it. Yeah, I thought there might be something there. A little hollow air bubble there. I'm just going to get rid of that. Make sure it's centered. Is it centered or not? Some water on it sticking to my fingers. You can't put much pressure on here because you just join that. And it will come loose very easily. So delicate touch, yep. And then you got a little knob. And just in case, I have this little thing done to do these knob lids so that they don't, because these things can dent the rim a little bit down there, so I've made this, I kept this sugar jar, a little jar, for this trimming purpose. I think I broke the lid on it or something, so I decided I could use it. It's like a chuck now, that's all. So I just make sure it's stuck down. Okay, looks pretty good. It's actually kind of nice to look at them in their camera because you're a little further away. Maybe that one goes down just a touch. That little patchwork kind of effect, I just don't know if I like it yet. It'll be too late tomorrow morning to change it. But I just wanted to try something a bit different. So I'm really trying to find a shape that I like. I wanted to do something really different. So it's squared off a little bit, basically. I don't like that bottom area down there. Yeah, I'm not sure about that one. I'll leave it because sometimes when you try something, it takes a while to get used to something. But anyway, actually that one's growing on me. So we'll see. The glazing will be fun.